The phenomenon known as Kiss, the theatrically costumed, larger-than-life rock band that emerged in the early 1970s, did not arise out of nowhere. Beneath the makeup, pyrotechnics, platform boots, and bombastic stage presence were four individuals shaped by remarkably different beginnings. Their origins trace back to the immigrant neighborhoods of New York City, the post-war echoes of Europe, and the working-class ethnic enclaves that helped define mid-20th century America. The varied childhoods of Peter Criss, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, and Paul Stanley provided not only the backdrop for their music and personas, but also the emotional engines that propelled them toward fame. Born George Peter John Criscola on December 20th, 1945, in the tough yet vibrant borough of Brooklyn, New York, Peter Criss grew up in an Italian-American family steeped in a culture of loyalty, tradition, and expressiveness. His parents, Joseph and Loretta, raised their children in the working-class neighborhood of Williamsburg, where young Peter found himself caught between the rough street environment and the artistic pulse running through the New York melting pot. Unlike many rock musicians who turned to music in adolescence, Criss was drawn to rhythm early. He discovered jazz records as a child and became enamored with legendary drummers like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich. These influences marked him long before he would ever dream of painting whiskers on his face and becoming the Catman. His parents, recognizing his talent, encouraged him to pursue music, something not every working-class family was able or willing to do during that era. Criss attended the Metropolitan Vocational High School, but his education was overshadowed by his growing love for drums. Yet Criss's childhood was not without turmoil. The environment of Brooklyn in the 1950s and early 60s was fraught with street gangs and economic struggle, experiences that would later find their way into the gritty emotionality of his singing. Looking back, Criss often described his childhood not just as formative, but as the crucible that forged the raw, emotional voice heard on Kiss classics like Beth and Black Diamond.
60s, 70s, it was the best time, I think, 50s, 60s, 70s, as Frankie Valli would say, in the history of music. There'll never be that again. I think the 60s, for me, was like maybe it was in Vienna for Beethoven and Mozart and those guys at that era of time. Because let's face it, nothing that was ever written after that. There was never other symphonies written like that. People tried, but who was going to top Beethoven, who was going to top Mozart, who was going to top Brahms, who was going to top all these, Chopin. There was a time that was supposed to happen. I believe the same thing in the 60s, 70s. That was the time to create. It was okay to create all you want. Nobody said you can't do that, you can't do this, and with that kind of carte blanche, then it was wonderful to let's throw a big let's throw some vibes or so here. No, that's unheard of. So what? That's the best part about it. Let's do that. So everything you wanted to create then was okay. There was a war going on. People were desperate. People were afraid. It was also a time of freedom. You could wear what you want to wear. You could grow your hair down here, which I did. It was a great time to be a rebel. And the 60s, to be in Greenwich Village was like an honor. I'd be there 24/7. I'd get on a train and I'd spend my life in Greenwich Village. In the main section, like near UCLA, NYU, the park, every Saturday and Sunday, man, I'm talking hundreds of musicians would come down there with congas, bongos, timbales, guitars, drums, and jam 24/7, all day long playing. Sunday, you go to Central Park, there was a fountain. Hundreds of musicians would meet and talk music of this. And what do you think of this band? What do you think of that band? What do you think of the British band? What do you think of the Zeppelin? What do you think of the Aucoin? And it would be so much knowledge of music was just so beaming in the world, and everyone wanted a piece. Everybody was listening to it. It seemed the Beatles were changing the world. Their lyrics were changing the world. It was an amazing time to be a young guy at that time, and I wouldn't give it up for all the tea in China.
Gene Simmons' early life is perhaps the most dramatic and culturally distinct among the band members. Born Chaim Witz on August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel, Simmons' childhood was marked by the hardships of post-war life and the lingering effects of the Holocaust on his family. His mother, Florence Klein, was a Hungarian Jew and a survivor of Nazi concentration camps. Her survival and resilience deeply shaped Simmons' worldview and the driven, uncompromising attitude he later became known for. Raised by a single mother after his father left the family, young Chaim lived modestly, learning the value of self-reliance early. He was fascinated by American culture, particularly comic books and rock and roll, which seeped into Israel through the channels of post-war cultural influence. His mother, seeking better opportunities, immigrated with him to the United States in 1958, when Simmons was 9 years old. They settled in New York City, where Chaim became Gene Klein, then eventually Gene Simmons. The transition from Israel to America was transformative. Simmons had to learn English, adapt to life in a new country, and navigate the duality of being an immigrant in a bustling, often unforgiving metropolis. A self-described outsider, he turned to fantasy, science fiction, comic books, monster movies as a refuge. These early interests directly informed his later creation of the Demon, the blood-spitting, fire-breathing persona that would become one of rock's most iconic characters. Simmons' American childhood was defined by relentless ambition. He pursued music with a hunger shaped by poverty, identity uncertainty, and a desire to create a larger-than-life version of himself that no one could overlook again.
We came to America, and I never saw or dreamed anything like that. The people were big, and everybody had cars, and you know, it's just, and because we came from dirt roads, it was a new country, and there wasn't even an infrastructure. And we visited my Aunt Magda, and she had a refrigerator. And she opened the refrigerator. It was full of food. We didn't have that. You had a piece of paper, like the English fish and chips, you know, where you stick it in a piece of newspaper and stuff, and you got your allotment for the week. And I remember looking at a jar of jam, and in Hungarian, I speak Hungarian as well, and asking my Aunt Magda in Hungarian, she too had been in the camps, what is this? And she goes, you know, she gave me a spoon and opened the thing. And she thought I was going to get a taste. And as soon as I tasted it, I started eating it because I'd never tasted anything like that. And both my mother and my aunt were laughing their heads off. I never saw television. I never saw people flying through the air with capes. I never saw anything. I'm still marvel at this amazing country. Yes, it has its blisters, its racism, it's all kinds of bad things with it. But I think clearly the UK and so on started with Guy Fawkes before he tried to blow up everything. And I know, but the history of democracy is the only hope we have on this planet.
Born Paul Daniel Frehley on April 27, 1951 in the Bronx, New York, Ace Frehley came into the world in one of the city's toughest boroughs, but in a home filled with music. His parents, Carl and Esther Frehley, were first-generation Americans of Dutch and German descent. The Frehley household was unusually musical. Many relatives played instruments, and this environment exposed Ace to rhythms and melodies from an early age. Unlike the disciplined Peter Criss or the self-reinventing Gene Simmons, young Ace was a rebellious child. Growing up in the Bronx in the 1950s and 60s meant navigating a landscape of social upheaval, racial tension, and a street culture that demanded toughness. Frehley was known for getting into trouble, skipping school, and joining local gangs. Yet beneath this rough exterior was a prodigious musical talent waiting for direction. Ace received his first electric guitar as a Christmas gift at age 13, a moment he later referred to as life-changing. The instrument became his obsession, drawing him away from the streets and into the world of rock music. He taught himself to play, absorbing influences ranging from blues-based rock to psychedelic sounds. His remarkable ear and natural feel for the guitar would later help him craft some of Kiss's most recognisable riffs and solos. In school, Frehley struggled academically but excelled in art, a foreshadowing of his future role in designing the spaceman persona and aesthetic. His background, chaotic yet creative, cultivated in him a sense of individuality and a knack for improvisation, traits that made his guitar playing unmistakably unique once he joined Kiss.
I started playing in bands when I was 13.
Wow.
You know, my first band was with my brother, and we played we played a couple of church dances and stuff, and then, it just got
So it starts.
more out of control.
How did? What was your first electric guitar? What was it like?
Some
Or what
Japanese piece of crap.
So-
Kent or I don't know, something.
So I see this beautiful Les Paul over here,
Yeah.
obviously custom made for you. How did you arrive at playing Les Paul? Because I always think that's like one of the heaviest damn guitars there is.
Well, I could never afford a Les Paul. I mean, they were expensive. So, I was like, the last guitar I was, well, actually, I had a reverse Firebird, when I auditioned for Kiss. But before that, I was using an Epiphone, which is kind of like the lower end Gibson models. And then once I got together with Kiss and, we signed a record deal, we all went to this music store on 48th Street called Manny's Music, and we all picked out new Marshall amps and guitars, and I picked out my first Tobacco Burst Les Paul. It was a standard back then, and eventually I graduated to a custom, and then I ended up customizing mine, and Gibson liked what I did, and the rest is history, Kistory.
Born Stanley Burt Eisen on January 20th, 1952 in Manhattan and raised in Queens, Paul Stanley was the child of Jewish parents deeply connected to the post-war immigrant experience. Though his upbringing was filled with cultural richness and familial warmth, it was also defined by profound personal struggles that shaped his lifelong drive for acceptance and artistic expression. Stanley was born with microtia, a congenital deformity that left him with a misshapen ear and partial deafness on his right side. This condition made his early years extremely difficult. He endured bullying and isolation because of his appearance. These experiences created in him a fierce determination to prove his worth and carve out a place where he could be seen and heard on his own terms. Despite the emotional challenges, music became Stanley's refuge. His parents introduced him to classical and light operatic music, while radio and television exposed him to early rock and roll. He picked up the guitar as a teenager, channeling his insecurities and frustrations into practice and songwriting. His talent blossomed quickly, and he developed a keen sense of melody and a powerful singing voice. Stanley attended the High School of Music and Art in New York, a prestigious institution that nurtured his artistic sensibilities. Surrounded by creative peers, he found the acceptance he lacked in childhood and began imagining a future on stage. His dream was not just to perform, but to be adored, an understandable desire given his early experiences with rejection. This emotional foundation later fueled his transformation into the charismatic star child, the glittering, romantic, larger-than-life frontman of Kiss.
I was born with a microtia, which is they used to call them birth defects. That's not accepted anymore, but it's different degrees of a crumpled cartilage instead of a formed ear. And I have no ear canal, and I was born virtually without an ear. So,
So hence music.
of course, make life difficult.
But that is a kind of a dichotomy and so ironic, no?
I don't know. I think you don't miss what you don't know. So when people say to me, well, how do you mix an album, or how did you do
Right.
this? Well, I hear it the way I've heard it my whole life. So I don't hear the way you do. But
People seem to like it the way you hear it.
it's, I'm doing okay.
So the problem with most people is they got sound coming in from both sides.
Yes.
If you want to be talented and you want to be able to create music and a sound that people are going to really respond to, plug an ear.
I would recommend that. But it's interesting because other than the problems you have as a child with people scrutinizing or teasing. And
Were you
things.
teased?
Oh, it was not a fun time. It's amazing because children could be quite cruel, and surprisingly adults too. And yeah, it wasn't fun. It wasn't easy.
So were you a tortured child?
I don't want to say tortured. That's a horrible term, but I had it pretty tough. But there's people who've had it much tougher than me. At one point, I was speaking with an organization in Canada called About Face. And
You're their spokesperson.
I
That's
was, yeah.
yeah.
And I met with a lot of the children, and I said, look, I can't say that I've got the problems you do, or as difficult as you do. And certainly the playing field's not level, and it's not always fair, but you can succeed.
By the time Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were still figuring out their musical identities, Peter Criss was already a veteran of the New York club scene. His jazz training gave him an edge over many rock drummers of the time, and during the late 60s he became involved in a local band called Chelsea. Chelsea leaned toward a softer rock sound than Criss would later be known for, but it gave him essential recording experience and a sense of the business side of music. Chelsea recorded one album but disbanded soon after, leaving Criss frustrated and searching for stability. The collapse of the band pushed him to explore new directions, including a brief stint with the group Lips, but more importantly, it motivated him to place an ad in Rolling Stone seeking musicians for a serious committed rock project. That ad, understated at the time, would become one of the most fateful actions in Kiss history. Criss spent these years playing gritty bars, dealing with unreliable promoters, and trying to carve out a place among the numerous aspiring bands of Manhattan and Brooklyn. His experience would later make him indispensable to the ambitious but relatively unseasoned team of Simmons and Stanley. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, still Chaim Witz reborn as Gene Klein and Stanley Eisen at the time, met through their shared musical hunger. Both were in their early 20s when they crossed paths in the late 1960s. While musically different, Simmons favoured heavier bass-driven rock and pop influences, while Stanley gravitated toward melodic rock and British groups. They discovered a powerful alignment in ambition. They bonded not just over music, but over an unwavering desire to achieve stardom. Their early collaboration resulted in a band called Wicked Lester.
I was playing with a guitar player in Washington Heights, which is interestingly the neighborhood that I first grew up in. 211th Street and Broadway was where I was originally from. I found a guitar player who I was playing with, and one day I went over to his house, his apartment, and there was another guy there, and he said, "This is Gene, he writes songs, and this is Stan." At that time I was Stanley. I still am, only now it's my last name. But I said, "Yeah, I write songs," and Gene said, "Oh, play me one." And I sat down and played him a song, which incidentally wound up on our first album, and he played me one song, which didn't. So I famously didn't take to him immediately, and when Steve, this other guitar player, said, "Why don't we have a band together?" I said, "Well, you can play with him, or you can play with me, but you're not going to play with us."
The group blended rock, folk, and pop elements, drawing from the eclectic sounds dominating New York's music scene. Wicked Lester secured a contract and even recorded an album, but the project left Simmons and Stanley deeply dissatisfied. The music felt directionless, overly experimental, and in their minds, lacking the power they envisioned for their careers. Most importantly, Wicked Lester lacked cohesion and theatricality. Simmons and Stanley, who both grew up enthralled by comic books and dramatic visuals, wanted more than just another rock band. They dreamed of a transformative experience that fused spectacle with sound. The failure of Wicked Lester became the catalyst for change. The two vowed to start afresh, build a band with a unified image, and take full control of their creative destiny. This dissolution led them to seek new bandmates, and it is here that the seeds of Kiss began to sprout. While Simmons and Stanley were learning lessons inside recording studios, Ace Frehley was learning lessons on the streets of the Bronx. His childhood involvement with local gangs was not a trivial or short-lived phase. Frehley was known as a kid who lived recklessly. He fought, partied, skipped school, and walked a tightrope between danger and disaster. His gang, often referred to in his later accounts simply as the Ducky Boys, placed him in environments where violence and chaos were commonplace. Yet his introduction to the electric guitar pulled him away from this trajectory. Music became his alternate universe, a place where he could express rebellion without self-destruction. By his late teens, Frehley was more seriously devoted to playing guitar than to running the streets. He joined several local bands, quickly developing a reputation as a flashy, intuitive, hard rock guitarist with a sound that was uniquely his own. Unpolished, but electrifying.
Yeah, I got involved with a gang because I got tired of getting beat up. You know, when you're in a gang, you have protection. You know, you're walking down the street and somebody wants to pick a fight with you, and his buddy will go, "Don't pick a fight with him, he's in the Ducky Boys." You know, and what movie was the Ducky Boys were in that movie, The Warriors? Is that the name of the film? Whatever. But that's pretty much why I got involved with the gang scene, even though it wasn't something that I really was excited about or really wanted to do. I just wanted protection. But I was telling another interviewee just this afternoon, what happened was, as I got older, you know, I joined the gang when I was about 13, and that's around the time I picked up a guitar. So by the time I was 14, I was already in bands and performing on weekends at like church dances and so on and so forth, wherever we could play. So by the time I was like 15, I was really into it and working almost every weekend. And I'd be getting calls from the guys in the gang going, "Hey, we got a fight tonight in a schoolyard, you know, bring your switchblade." And I'd say, "I can't go, I got a gig." So pretty much music kind of got me out of that whole gang scene. It saved my life.
Frehley's escape from gang culture coincided with his desire to join a band that matched his theatrical, rebellious energy. This search led him to a newspaper classified ad placed by Simmons and Stanley, an ad that would change his life and theirs. In early 1973, Peter Criss became the band's drummer through a mix of timing, determination, and the gritty experience he had earned on the New York club circuit. After the breakup of his earlier band Chelsea and several frustrating attempts to find a stable musical home, Criss placed an ad in Rolling Stone seeking musicians who were committed to forming a serious, long-term rock group. Around the same time, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, newly free from their failed project Wicked Lester, were searching for a drummer with both skill and personality. When they reached out and arranged an audition, Criss immediately impressed them with his raspy, soulful voice, his solid jazz-trained drumming, and his streetwise confidence. He brought a level of professionalism and emotional intensity that Simmons and Stanley felt their evolving vision needed.
Eventually, we found an interesting ad in Rolling Stone and rang the number. We had one line of questioning. "Would you do anything to make it?" "Yeah," said the guy on the other end of the line. "Would you wear a dress?" "Yeah." We arranged to meet the guy in front of Electric Lady down on 8th Street. He was dressed very cool, cooler than us. He looked quite a bit older than I was, and he had about 5 names. George, Peter, John, Criscola, blah, 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 but he went by Peter Criss. We walked to a pizza joint and sat down with our slices. We hadn't been talking for 5 minutes when Peter blurted out, "I have a 9-inch dick." I didn't know what to say. Pass the cheese? This guy was very different from us. Peter could barely read or spell, and he wasn't a thinker. Still, we agreed to go see him play a gig he had coming up in a bar in Brooklyn. The place was called the King's Lounge, and the other 2 guys in his band looked like they should be making pizzas or cement shoes. Peter looked completely different from them, and he exuded an air of confidence. He had swagger. The crowd was sparse, but something about his performance struck me. He played the bar like it was a packed arena. He was into it. After that, we asked him to come to our rehearsal space the next day to try playing together.
His ability to sing lead vocals while delivering heavy, steady rhythms set him apart from other drummers they had auditioned. By the end of those early sessions, it was clear that Peter Criss offered exactly the grounding energy the group required, and he was welcomed into the lineup, helping lay the foundation for what would soon become Kiss.
I had never envisioned the band as a power trio anyway. I never wanted to try to sustain the band on my guitar alone. And besides, I wanted to swing my arm and pose and leave the acrobatic playing to somebody else.
So it was back to the drawing board, or rather back to the newspaper. We really needed a lead guitar player. Guitar player wanted with flash and balls. That was the ad we placed in the Village Voice. And when we opened the door to our rehearsal space on the appointed day in December 1972, we had a lot of takers, more than 30. But becoming a rock star meant looking like a rock star. So we had some specific rules: no bald heads, no beards, and no excess weight.
Ace Frehley arrived to audition for Simmons, Stanley and Criss after responding to their advertisement. The audition took place at a cramped rehearsal room on 10 East 23rd Street.
It was interesting. I walked up the stairs. I had a reverse Firebird. At the time, I got there a little early. I had one red sneaker, one orange sneaker on.
Yeah.
And Bob Kulick was auditioning when I got there. And I remember I pulled out my guitar and I just started, practicing scales. And I remember Gene coming over to me going, "Would you please put your guitar away? You're making the other guy nervous." And then, when he got finished, I plugged in, and I played a little, and I could see that they were impressed with some of the riffs I was doing. Yeah. And then they said to me, "Listen, we're going to play a song for you, and then you listen to it. It's in the key of A, and then you try playing along." And the song they played for me, the very first song I heard was Deuce. And to this day, that's still my favorite Kiss song. And I just got up there and, jammed away on it. And then, we did a few more others. We went over a few more songs, and they seemed pleased, but they didn't want to make a commitment to me the first time I went there. So they said, "We'll definitely call you back." And they called me back in 2 weeks, and I played with them again. And after that second audition, they said, "You're the guy."
Another guy named Bob Kulick was a really good player, but he didn't fit the look we had in mind. After a long and mostly fruitless freak show, a guy walked in wearing one red sneaker and one orange sneaker. He was about my age and kind of goofy and pigeon-toed. While we were still talking to Bob, this other guy plugged in his guitar and started playing. "Hey man, shut up and wait your turn," we told him. Eventually, we plugged in with him, and almost from the minute we started playing, something happened that took us to a completely different place. The combination of the four of us was so much bigger than anything we'd done with the other guitar players. We weren't the greatest musicians, but the chemical reaction of the four of us was potent. 1 minute we had been one thing, and a minute later with this guy named Ace Frehley, we became something else, something undeniable. I was absolutely stunned. This is it. This is lethal. This is the goods.
I think Paul and Gene both realized, due to our conversations at the audition, that my influences and what I was into were exactly what they were into. All the bands that I loved, they loved. So I think that, and the fact that I thought that their choice of Ace was perfect for what they were doing. A really excellent player with a really great image and super personality. And I think they felt that the magic was there with him. And maybe I didn't at the time qualify as much on all of those issues, and so I accepted that.
With Simmons, Stanley, Criss and Frehley united, the concept of a new band took shape quickly. They agreed that their music needed to be powerful, straightforward and unapologetically loud. Unlike the eclectic sounds of Wicked Lester, their look also needed to set them apart. Drawing from their childhood influences, comic books, science fiction, glam rock, monster movies, they developed the idea of wearing makeup and creating characters. Each member's persona emerged from their inner lives. Gene Simmons, inspired by his childhood love of comic monsters and driven by his desire for invulnerability, became the demon, the embodiment of power and intimidation. Paul Stanley, who spent his childhood battling insecurity and longing for connection, created the Star Child, a glamorous romantic figure who commanded the spotlight. Peter Criss, influenced by his gritty upbringing and his instinctive toughness, became the Catman, a survivor with 9 lives. Ace Frehley, fueled by his love of science fiction and his desire to escape earthly constraints, became the spaceman, an otherworldly guitarist seemingly not bound by gravity or rules. The name Kiss emerged during one of the band's early brainstorming sessions as they searched for a short, sharp, memorable word that captured their bold, rebellious identity. According to the band's early accounts, Paul Stanley suggested Kiss because it was simple, provocative, and carried both a sense of danger and glamour, perfect for a group that wanted to fuse theatrics with hard driving rock.
All of us were riding in my car. I think it was a Plymouth or a Dodge Polara, and we were throwing.
Once the name was chosen, Ace Frehley took the lead on designing the band's now iconic logo. Drawing from his background in art and his instinct for bold graphic imagery, Ace sketched the letters in a heavy angular style, sharpening the final two S characters into lightning bolt shapes. The design immediately gave the band a distinctive visual identity that matched their explosive sound and stage presence. Though later refined for professional use, the logo that would appear on albums, merch, and stages worldwide was fundamentally Ace's creation, another essential piece of Kiss mythology born from the imagination of the spaceman himself.
Ace really came up with the concept and an early version of the logo. The one that everybody sees is actually the actual one that I did. We've used that for going on 50 years now, but Ace really came up with the original idea, although the logo that you see is one that I did.
In fact, he's trying to take credit for designing the Kiss logo.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
I know.
I have a copy of the original button.
Yeah, is that the original? Cool. Wow.
No, this isn't the original. It's a copy.
Okay, yeah.
But I mean, the original one sold for $100,000.
Yeah.
But that's my original rendering of the logo. You know, we did away with the lips and the eye over the eye. And all Paul did was, since he was a trained artist and went to music and art in Manhattan, is he made the lines straighter, you know, and gave it to the art department, you know, for our first record.
The musicians pushed one another mercilessly. Simmons demanded precision, Stanley aimed for charisma and polish, Frehley chased electrifying leads, and Criss fought to fuse his jazz training with the harder-edged rock style the band sought. But the rehearsals were not only about sound, they were about spectacle. The group experimented with make-up concepts, platform boots, stage movements, and synchronized gestures. Simmons practiced fire breathing and developing his demon persona, while Stanley honed the glittering presence that would become the Star Child. Ace worked on the cosmic coolness of the spaceman, and Criss channeled streetwise toughness into the Catman. These visual identities were still rough at the time, but they were forming, and they gave the band a sense of purpose that fueled their confidence through the grueling early months. In the first few months, none of the members could afford to live on music alone. Each man juggled whatever work he could find, creating an ironic contrast between their future star personas and their very real financial struggles. Gene Simmons worked as a grade school teacher, surprising given his later demonic stage persona. He taught in Spanish Harlem and worked odd jobs, such as typing manuscripts to help keep himself afloat. Paul Stanley took on graphic design and odd labour jobs, sometimes earning money by painting signs or assisting in art studios. His artistic background would later inform Kiss's visual world. Peter Criss, older and more experienced in the working musician's grind, played pickup gigs in bars and lounges whenever possible, supplementing income with part-time labour and club work. Ace Frehley, never suited for conventional employment, drifted between jobs. He worked brief stints as a mailroom clerk, drove delivery vans and took whatever day work he could manage, often quitting or getting fired as fast as he started. Stanley and Frehley also worked at night as cab drivers in New York City. Kiss played their first official show on January 30th, 1973 at the Popcorn Club, soon renamed the Coventry, in Queens. The club was virtually empty, just a handful of curious spectators, and the band wore rudimentary makeup designs that were still evolving. Their costumes were little more than mismatched glam outfits, but their energy was undeniable. In these early shows, the band performed with a ferocity that shocked audiences accustomed to mellow acoustic acts or conventional rock bands. Their sound was tight and loud, their movements choreographed, and their stage presence already theatrical.
With these shows under our belts, we felt confident in our songs. Sure, we still had tinkering to do on our look and stagecraft, but musically, we had gelled extremely quickly and our set already sounded the way we wanted it to. The next step, we figured, was to make a demo to shop to labels. Eddie Kramer was a legendary audio engineer and producer who had worked with the Kinks, the Small Faces, Jimi Hendrix, and Led Zeppelin. Eddie oversaw the sessions, but his assistant, Dave Whitman, did the actual recording. We cut demos of Black Diamond, Strutter, Deuce, and Watching You. The other track we cut, Cold Gin, was a song Ace brought to the table and Gene and I tweaked.
Well, the story is that I did their demo, which got them their record deal.
Wow. So you're responsible for them.
Well, yeah, I guess. Yeah, in a funny sort of way. So you can imagine Electric Lady in the 70s, right? And I see Gene and Paul walking up and down the hallway and doing their thing. And they had a record that they did called Wicked Lester. But it was freaking terrible. I mean, they were trying to sound like the Beatles. It was freaking horrible.
And that was kind of their goal, though, to be the Beatles of the heavy world, right?
It went out and straight in the bloody toilet. So I get a phone call from Ron Johnson, who was their producer at the time, and he says, "Hey, Eddie, look, Gene and Paul got a new concept. It's a heavy rock band. Do you want to do a demo for me?" I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." So I said, "All right, if we're going to do this, let's do it the old-fashioned way. 4-track, Studio B, half-inch 4-track, blah, blah, blah. On the appointed day, all the lads walk in, and Ace is late. Ace Frehley, I love him dearly. So Ace walks in, and I swear to God, this guy was so thin, if you turned him sideways, he would disappear, you know. He was driving a cab in the Bronx, you know. Wow. And he plugs in, and it's like, this is the guy. I mean, he was the heart and soul of Kiss, I think. Certainly from a guitar playing point of view. And, you know, Peter Criss, you know, "Hey, man, I'm from the Bronx, you know, I'm tattooed and, you know, I'm Italian, you know, dude, hey, yo." But it was great. Those boys were so cool in those days. And, you know, we did the demo, and I'm looking, okay, you're Gene Simmons, right?
Yes. Jay Brody, by the way, Eddie Kramer. Jay's the greatest guy.
Gene.
Yeah.
So Gene's sitting next to me, and he's got this book right here like this, right? And I'm working away, and I'm looking over, and it's every page has a drawing of each of the characters that are going to be in Kiss, all perfectly sketched out, with a description of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, how they're going to dress, and what their whole image was. And if you flip the page, there's Gene, all right, with the tongue and the whole thing. There's Paul, the star, and Peter, and so on and so on. He had the concept.
Like storyboarding, they knew. It was all planned.
Storyboarding, he planned the whole thing out. And I remember seeing them at the Hotel Diplomat with their manager, the lately departed Bill Aucoin. And I was backstage, and I was looking at these guys, and I was going, wow, they can't play in time, they can't play in tune, but there's something magical about these guys. It's like Kabuki Theater, which is exactly where they got it from. So there you go.
The club owners didn't know what to make of them. Some early listeners were bewildered, others amused, but a few instantly recognised that something different was happening. Even when audiences were small, Kiss performed as if they were already playing Madison Square Garden. Word slowly spread. Their second home became the Hotel Diplomat. Audience reactions during the first few months were unpredictable. Some viewers dismissed the band as a gimmick. Others were fascinated by the makeup and ferocity of the performance, even if they didn't fully understand it. And a small minority, the earliest Kiss faithful, were electrified by what they saw. These were the fans who followed the band from show to show, spreading the word that something new and radical was on the horizon. Critics at the time were sceptical, often dismissing the band as too strange, too theatrical or too aggressive. But the band was not concerned. Kiss had already decided that they were after something bigger than the approval of critics. They wanted to capture the imagination of those who felt like outsiders. People drawn to spectacle, energy and raw power. In those first few months, Kiss forged the core elements that would define them for decades. A unified visual identity, a thunderous rock sound, an unwavering work ethic, and a shared belief that they were destined for something greater than the dingy clubs of New York City. In 1973, after months of intense rehearsals, club dates, and the slow but steady shaping of their theatrical personas, Kiss stood on the edge of a breakthrough. They had the discipline, the vision, and the hunger. But what they lacked was a record deal. Without one, their momentum risked fading into the noise of New York's crowded rock scene. The first several months of Kiss's existence had already transformed the group from 4 ambitious musicians into a unified creative force. What came next, securing a record deal, making their first album and perfecting their live show, would lift them out of obscurity and set them on the path toward becoming one of the most influential bands in rock history. The turning point came with a now legendary performance at the Hotel Diplomat in mid-1973. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, having learned from the missteps of their previous band Wicked Lester, treated the show as a make-or-break moment. They booked the ballroom themselves, handed out flyers, and packed the room with as many curious spectators as possible. On stage, they unleashed a blistering set of original songs, tight, aggressive, and fueled by adrenaline. The makeup was still evolving, the costumes still mismatched, but the overall effect was undeniable. Among the audience was Bill Aucoin, a visionary television director with an eye for talent and a reputation for bold ideas. Deeply impressed by Kiss's theatrical energy and disciplined performance, Aucoin approached the band immediately after the show.
I remember when I was shooting a television show called Flipside, and I kept getting notes every week. Probably written by Gene Simmons. They were handwritten, and they included backstage passes to see Kiss, whoever Kiss was. Well, after I finished shooting the 13 weeks of the show, I decided maybe I'd have more fun in the music business. So I decided to go see this group, Kiss. And one night, an advertising executive and myself traveled over to the Diplomat Hotel. Yes, the famous Diplomat, kind of a rundown hotel. We worked our way around the holes and sat down in the front row. Well, this was different, all right. Kiss came out. They had black jeans on, a few studs, had some firelights, and some smoke. They used smoke even then. Well, we listened to this group called Kiss with their partial makeup. They didn't have all the makeup yet, but they had part of it. And said, well, this is certainly different. They are certainly performers. They definitely were performers. And next to me was a young girl screaming and hollering and telling me how great they were. They're wonderful. Oh, you've got to sign them. This group is great. They're my favorite. I found out later it was Peter's sister. But in any case, I left that night after speaking to Paul and Gene and told them we should get together in a week or so and discuss their career. A few days later, they came up to my office and we discussed what we could do. I said, why don't you give me a chance, at least give me 30 days, I'll see if I can get you a record deal, and then we can decide whether we're going to stay together or not. They agreed. And within those 30 days, I had talked to Neil Bogart. Neil Bogart had done one of my television shows, and I knew him pretty well, and I also knew he was leaving Buddha Records to start a new record company, soon to be called Casablanca. So Neil was looking for talent. I said I saw a unique band, a little over the top, wore makeup, but they were very persistent, very exciting, and I thought it could work. Neil said, well, do you have any tapes? I said, well, I'll get you a demo and see what you think. Sure enough, they brought a demo to the office. The demo was done by Eddie Kramer. Very good demo. Had a lot of good songs that all of you know, like Firehouse and Strutter and Black Diamond. Anyway, I brought it to Neil, and Neil gave it to a couple of his producers. The two producers at Buddha then were Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, and they had recorded a number of hits for him at Buddha, and they were going to travel to L.A. to be part of the new record label called Casablanca. Anyway, he brought it to them, and he said, look it, what do you think? If you like them, I think we'll sign this group. Well, both Richie and Kenny were rock and rollers and loved the idea of recording a rock and roll band, even though they didn't know about the makeup and what crazies they were. Well, eventually Neil said they would sign him. I told the guys, and within 30 days we had a record deal and we proceeded to do the album.
Though initially skeptical of the makeup and outrageous presentation, Bogart was electrified after seeing the band live. The power, theatrics, and sheer presence of the group convinced him that Kiss represented something entirely new. In late 1973, Casablanca Records signed Kiss, making them one of the label's flagship artists. It was a partnership defined by mutual ambition. The label wanted a groundbreaking act, and the band wanted the freedom to redefine the boundaries of rock music. Kiss entered Bell Sound Studios in New York with a clear goal: to capture the songs they had honed through months of rigorous rehearsal. Many of the tracks were already polished to near perfection during daily practices in their Manhattan basement space. The band recorded quickly and efficiently, laying down future classics such as Juice, Strutter, Cold Gin, Firehouse, and Black Diamond.
When I first heard Kiss, I thought they did it incredibly well. And I thought the songs were real catchy, Cold Gin and Strutter, things of that nature, I thought these are really great songs. And the band really sounded like they had a vision. But little did I know that when I finally met them and started working with them, and I'll love to go on record to say, this was the most focused, the most absolute, put blinders on, one-dimensional, we are going to be the biggest, this is what we're going to do. All the thought process that Gus didn't have, Kiss had it. Kiss were so amazing in their complete just view of who they were, what they wanted to be, where they were going. And I learned a lot from that. And there was no denying that they had a vision for what they were doing. The songs, everything just had to fit into their vision. When we were in the studio doing the first album, all of them would be drawing pictures of what they wanted boots to look like and costumes to look like. They had, as you see on the first album, a very primitive makeup vision,
right.
That became crazier, but they were into it. The whole thing was just focused beyond belief. And first album was a pleasure. Working with them, working on arrangements, working on getting some great vocals out of them, and loved it. Paul, my thought on Paul, never cared about being Clapton. Wanted to be the best rhythm guitarist in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
He wanted to be Pete Townsend. He used to say that to me. I love Pete Townsend. I want to be this most solid rhythm player. He was. Gene was really focused. I mean, he had a vision in his brain. He had it completely where what he wanted to do. And then that was just admirable, unbelievable. Loved it. And Ace and Peter, easy to work with, good players, and a lot of fun. And the first album was a pleasure to do.
Yet despite the quality of the material, the band felt the studio versions lacked the explosive energy of their live performances. The rawness, the volume, the visual electricity. All of it was hard to reproduce in a controlled recording environment. From the beginning, the stage was the element in which Kiss felt most at home. Their characters, their theatrics, and their attitude all came alive under the lights. Kiss approached live performance with the intensity of a military operation. Rehearsals were focused not only on musicianship, but on precise choreography, timing, and theatrics. The band wasn't simply playing songs. They were crafting an immersive rock spectacle. Gene Simmons, embracing his demon persona, developed his fire-breathing routine, practiced meticulously and dangerously with lighter fluid. Later he added his legendary blood-spitting trick, which became a centerpiece of the show. Paul Stanley, as the star child, honed the swagger, glitz and flamboyant presence that made him the band's charismatic frontman. His moves, gestures and interactions with the crowd became integral elements of the Kiss experience. Ace Frehley, the spaceman, introduced smoke bombs into his guitar solos, making smoke shoot from his Les Paul during thunderous leads. His cool, detached stage presence, contrasted with Simmons' menace and Stanley's flamboyance, gave the band a perfect balance. Peter Criss, the Catman, held the performance together with powerful drumming and gritty vocals. From his throne behind the kit, he was the emotional and rhythmic heartbeat of the live show. The band also introduced early pyrotechnics, sirens, strobes and smoke machines, effects unheard of for club-level acts. Their performances felt as though they belonged in arenas long before the band actually reached arena stages. Audience reactions were mixed but intense. Some club-goers laughed at the makeup or were baffled by the spectacle. Others were stunned into silence, but a growing number of fans were captivated instantly, becoming loyal followers who would attend every show they could. Kiss may not have been universally understood, but they were impossible to forget. Each performance added fuel to their rising momentum, and word of mouth began spreading. There was a new band in New York, loud, wild, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen. In the span of only a few months, Kiss transformed themselves from a struggling New York club band into a fully realised artistic vision with a record contract, a debut album, and a groundbreaking live show. Though commercial success was not immediate, the elements that would propel them to global stardom were already in motion. The makeup, the personas, the pyrotechnics, the discipline, and most of all the unwavering belief that they were destined for greatness. The band's early hunger, daring, and relentless creativity laid the foundation for their ascent. One fiery performance, one explosive rehearsal, and one iconic album at a time. Their journey had only just begun, but the storm that would soon sweep across the world was already gathering force.
We were four knuckleheads off the streets of New York, no expertise, no experience, who had this bizarre notion of putting together a band that we'd never seen before. Why can't you be on stage and spit fire or have rockets come out of your guitars or fly through the air, which had nothing to do with blues or rockabilly or anything. Yeah, let's write some songs, but if the song's called Firehouse, how come we just have to sing, "Get the fire, 'cause she sets my soul on fire"? Why can't we spit fire? No other band, like, it's nuts.
We wanted to be the Beatles. We wanted to be four guys that each one of us was like John, Paul, Ringo, and George, and everyone loved each one of us separately, but all together they loved us like immensely. And that was, we thought, wow, what a great idea. It was like kind of when we saw Alice Cooper, he was the only one who had makeup on. No one else did. So we thought, what would it be like if four guys had the makeup on? And the four guys all shared the limelight. It was great. Those days are gone. Everything went crazy.
We were basically a bunch of guys out of the street with a bunch of guitars who were singing about New York City and about things that were just important to us. So how good were we? I doubt that we would win any awards for our musical proficiency, but we certainly had a tremendous amount of dedication.
Kiss was a special group. You know, the chemistry between me, Peter, Paul, and Gene, and the collective thought was just something that is hard to describe and to put into words, but when you heard us play, you know it was special.